Good evening, everyone. It's 5 p.m., even a couple of minutes after 5 p.m. So we have to start because we have quite a limited time for this discussion today. My name is Darius Staliūnas, and I will be chairing this discussion. And we have very distinguished panelists today. I will start from the right. Professor Jan Malicki from the Warsaw University. Professor Irena Vaišvilaitė from this university, from Vilnius. Professor Anke Hilbrenner from Heinrich University, Düsseldorf. Professor Olena Palko, University of Basel, Switzerland. And last but not least, Professor Andrii Portnov, European University of Irena in Frankfurt, Oder. First of all, I have to remind you that there is a simultaneous translation into Ukrainian. We decided that we'll use just English for the sake of the discussion, but please use headphones if you need a translation into Ukrainian. And I will say now a very important thing, because I might forget at the very end. I think that we can say thank you for the translators who are doing a very good job for these days. So may I ask for your applause now. Usually we do that at the very end, but we might have a very heated debate, so I might forget. For this final discussion, various topics could be chosen. For example, the destruction of museums and archives in Ukraine during the war, the situation in the future of displaced scholars, etc. If anyone thinks that the chosen topic for this discussion is not the most appropriate, it should be blamed on me and not anyone else. But it seemed to me that today at this academic conference, this kind of discussion makes sense. Thus, do Ukraine and East Central Europe have a history? I have no doubt that most of the Congress participants, when they saw the subject of this debate, easily recognized the paraphrase of the title of late Mark von Hagen article. I mean, at least all Ukrainians know it. But in that article, published 30 years ago, and in this discussion today, we are talking about the history of Ukraine, or the history of Lithuania, or Poland, or the region usually called East Central Europe as a legitimate field of research and teaching in academia outside of the region. First of all, outside of the region. At this discussion, it's difficult to ask a question that has not been asked in the last year and a half. Moreover, some of the participants in this group have already been involved in many discussions, and they already confronted most of these questions. But the issues are so important that they will need to be raised again and again in the future, and so I think it makes sense to do it today. So let me start with my first question. Does Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine, which began a year and a half ago, or maybe from 2014, require us to rethink how the history of Ukraine has been written? Now it's very fashionable to talk about decolonization. So I would like to know what is your take on this issue, but most importantly, what you mean by that, if you would use that terminology. Because some, by using this terminology, have in mind some institutional changes, like changing the titles of associations, titles of some journals or institutions, but others would argue that there are even more important things like changing our vocabulary. So, what's your take on this issue? And maybe I would like to start with Anke. You are in the middle, so the floor is yours.
Okay, beware where you take your seat. Okay, yes, but I will just mention 3 things about what does it mean to decolonize our study of Eastern Europe, and this is of course, well, the whole perspective that has to be changed. And by the way, to your first question, I think it's very important to change the perspective. And the 3 takes I would suggest, and maybe we can discuss them further, is the one thing important is the language, and this is something that we are already discussing here today. For example, in Germany, the question for the historians of Eastern Europe, which is very often Russian and Soviet studies, is Russian, and this is often also perceived as the lingua franca of the area, and this is something that underwent changes, of course, in the last couple of years. And but what does this mean also for university teaching, for bringing new young scholars to the field? This is one topic I think we are dealing with. The other take is, well, a regional take. It's about decentralizing our notion of Eastern Europe. On one hand, of course, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, that has been very much in the center, is to be decentralized, but on the other hand, maybe also certain national views on the topic can also be decentralized by looking at different actors, different approaches. And the third topic would be, and this is very much connected, as different actors, and it's not about like only referring to the power structures that make the empires, but also deconstructing them and looking at other actors, topics that are also important for the region we are dealing with.
Okay, maybe Irena? No? Can you take that from?
Thank you. I absolutely agreeing with what Anke was saying. I was thinking, and I still think, that if we're talking about decolonizing, even that concept itself is very diverse, depending to whom you speak, and it might be coming from Global South, and Global South does not very much even accept all our talking about decolonizing of this part. But I think concept itself of Central and especially Eastern Europe is colonial. And we have to look into it. Because yes, it's very deeply rooted but it's not just territory, it's also certain concepts about history. How to read it, what is it? Of course, the role of Russia. And it looks like it's a region that is, in a certain way, is just between Germany and Russia, and how it was moving. But in studies of second half of 20th century, concept of Eastern Europe was mostly going on the line of Iron Curtain. So what means the territory of Soviet colonies, Soviet Union and its colonies, territory republics, I mean those that were fully incorporated in Soviet Union, and Central Europe, East Europe, because they're definitely question of Balkans is unclear. So this also on conceptual level, looking into history, recent and old, it has to be retaught. I think it's important process if we are going to engage into decolonization. And that would involve even, I'm talking from a country that had no Russian studies, no Central European studies, no Eastern studies, and now we're trying to introduce Ukrainian studies without real knowledge of Ukraine, as such. So, but definitely there's need, and in this way also, Lithuania in many ways in our history, writing and academic activity is still coming out of the situation of colony, and I could elaborate on it more, but not here. In history, we could not specialize in Germany. We had no specialists in history of Germany, France, not talking about United States or something like that. It was left for scholars in Moscow or Leningrad, universities there. And even if talking about studying region, we could not, especially, for example, I think Lithuanians did huge leap in research on Grand Duchy of Lithuania, but till almost 1990, maybe a couple of years before, to have research that would have in title of it Grand Duchy of Lithuania was total taboo. And very quickly you were expected and actually told that you can study only what is in administrative line, the borders of Soviet Lithuania. We still have it. And especially if historians walked about it, my first specialization is culture and cultural history. They're still stuck in there. So that's the colonizing too. So that's what actually provokes. Because once we start thinking about what we can say about Ukraine, first it starts from what we can say about ourselves as explorers.
Okay, thank you. You touched upon a very interesting issue that we're going to discuss in a couple of minutes, that's of mental maps. So maybe we can skip it for this round and then come back in a couple of minutes. Jan, would you like to react to this? Or no?
Very shortly apropos this decolonization and apropos Ukraine, of course, the main topic today and tomorrow, yesterday, today and tomorrow, I suppose. So if we skip this traditional and simple definition of decolonization, center, periphery, capital, colony, etc., if we skip it, we can see now very interesting process when we can see Ukraine's striking out, or Ukraine's standing up to be independent and decolonized, not in opinion of Ukrainians themselves, but in opinion of whole the world, because we know very well that in French historiography, German historiography, and American historiography also, those territories, and not only Ukraine, but we are here to discuss Ukraine. So Ukraine's territories, it was not Ukraine, but a part of Russian Empire. It was the main voice of Western historiography, excluding only émigré centers from our region, but that was not majority in historiography of America and Western European countries.
Okay, Olena, would you like to react now or to wait for the second question?
Can I still add?
Sure.
Can I still add to the decolonization? Perhaps I will be a little bit in discord with the panel, because personally I don't like the word decolonization, and I don't like, I think we need to understand it can mean different things. I don't like this call to decolonize the field as it's understood kind of generally or conventionally, because I think it prescribes this moral dimension, who is good, who is bad, and as such it kind of takes away the agency, positively and negatively defined, from Ukraine and other parts of Russian Empire, Soviet Empire, and so on. So I don't like this term of decolonization, because then we have who is the metropole, who is the colony. And I think this doesn't help us to move anywhere forward. So this is first. But I think there is one realm where the word decolonization is very important, and this is epistemological decolonization. And what I mean by this is that we need to think who produces the knowledge, who tells us what we are and where we are. And in a way, even why we are now discussing decolonization, this is also symptomatic of these epistemological hierarchies. Because Andrii knows very well that kind of the fact that Ukraine was a colony, that in kind of in literary studies, in cultural studies, this debate in Ukraine has been ongoing ever since 1991 and perhaps even earlier. But nobody ever heard Ukrainians. And just because this term is popular now in the West, everyone is forcing us to decolonize ourselves. So I think this is kind of the hierarchy of this knowledge production. And from this perspective, I think congresses or kind of conferences like this are very important, because Ukrainians in this context are equal partners. They are not cheap labor, they are not research assistants. We are listening to them as partners, we exchange and we discuss. But here we come again to Anke, what you said about languages. It's not only kind of Western scholars and students and academics who should learn new languages. And this is perhaps something, I don't know, not very nice to hear, but Ukrainian colleagues also need to learn languages, because they need to join the conversation as equal partners. And unfortunately, if you only write in kind of national local languages, you will not be heard. And this is as academia is, right? So it kind of goes in both directions. And I think we need to strive for this epistemological decolonization, which will bring the real difference, and not to kind of put in labels and blaming victims and yeah. So this is my point of view.
Irena, you would like to have a short comment?
Yes, regarding language. When I was doing my second studies in Rome, medievist Benedictine monk, who was German, was saying that one thing he would like to change in his life, he was not young then, to learn Polish. And actually, learning Polish now, it's normal for Polonists. In history of Grand Lithuanian Duchy, there was time, when hardly any Polish historians, because it's mostly them who were interested in the topic, would learn Lithuanian. Now it's professionally unacceptable that you don't speak Lithuanian, or at least not able to read. And I think Ukraine, that is actually the language of the very large country. So I understand every scholar has to know languages that come to their field, but Ukrainian, one part of the decolonization is actually Ukrainian becoming language of the science, especially that science already exists. So I'm very sensitive about the issues of if they're at keynote speak, I know about Gegel's historical, non-historical concepts from very long ago, from studying at Moscow University. But there's also, there are not such thing as historical or non-historical, or scientific or not scientific languages. So that actually raises my radar. I glad here, actually, if you know a couple of Slavic languages, you understand Ukrainian, no problem. So this conference is equal of that. So I think we have to look into, for me already, that line, Ukrainian has to be learned, including also how much is already published on that language, also in the West. In the United States, in Italy, maybe other centers, I know those too. So that's it.
Okay, we are in our discussion for more than 20 minutes and we are still dealing with the first question. So as a moderator, I will discriminate now a Ukrainian colleague, and he will not get a mic now. But a couple of keywords were used here, like mental maps and the subjectivity. So what do we do with the concept of this region, Ukraine specifically, or Lithuania as a borderland? This proposition that we make this apparent weakness into the strength, and to present this region as a region of transfer or something like that. But at the same time, Sergei Yakelchik, the name is known in this audience, I think, argued that portraying Ukraine or any other region as a transfer region also deprives that country of its subjectivity. So this is what Olena was talking about. And I think, if I understood correctly what Robert Frost was talking about, he had also in mind this problem with transnational history and all other types of postmodern approach for this region. So, what do we do with our mental maps? Maybe Andrii, now discrimination stops.
Okay, so we all remember kind of, for instance, how popular the notion of mental mapping, then the notion of borderlands, and how it was applied to actually any topic, especially when it comes to East and Central Europe, right? You could always say it's borderland, and you are right, kind of, you sound very fashionable, up to date, you sound up to date, and that's it. Nowadays we could of course replace this metaphor with any other, like context zone or maybe. I'm asking like myself and all of us whether this metaphorical vocabulary change would really give us a new, let's say, methodological or epistemological insights into understanding of the issue. And quite often I'm not quite sure about it, even though, for instance, personally I have nothing against mental map as a category. I've used it in my writing as well, and it's okay. But what I found important in Sergei's comment, and actually it was also made in a text that is not often quoted, but actually I was very positively impressed by it and tried to promote it. I mean, a short article by Gennady Korolev, published in the New Eastern Europe Journal in Poland, but in English, published in English, but not in the leading. Oh, here we come into like a new division. So it's in English, but it's not Slavic Review or Ab Imperio, it's New Eastern Europe. And Gennady in this text says that he sees, so he feels the danger that this new entire decolonization / contact zone, whatever talk, in the case of Ukraine now, could bring us to the situation when Ukraine will not achieve this point of subjectivity, agency, being a proper hero of history, but still be used as like transfer between something and a way to rethink Russian or Soviet studies. I am not against rethinking Russian or Soviet studies. That's actually what we need to do everywhere, in Lithuania, in Ukraine, in Russia itself, and in the West. But I think this concern is a serious one. So do we just treat Ukraine as a zone, as a space where something happens, or it's a complex society with the agency of its own? I think that's the question we should seriously ask ourselves.
Yeah, who would else like to elaborate on this issue, or the question is solved? Okay, Anke, yeah, please.
Yes, I think it's interesting, and it reminds me also on our keynote lecture by Robert Frost. And this question, I always thought that we kind of overcome this perception of history being connected to statehood and agency is only is only awarded to those who have statehood and are not like a transnational group of actors. And this is probably something maybe I forgot during my first answer, that I think also topics is of course important. And I did my research, my PhD I wrote on a Jewish historian, and he was already in the 19th century making this clear distinction between history of the Jews of Eastern Europe and history of the state, obviously. Without it being just a history of ideas, but it was like a modern cultural and even everyday history. It was very, for me at least, already this perception from the 19th and early 20th century was very convincing as a historiographical approach, of course. We know from the history that all went wrong, but I would say as historians, we can lend agency to almost everybody, and also in network theories to objects, to regions, etc.
Yeah, first Olena and then Jan.
Thank you. I will just perhaps support Anke what you're saying. I think we deal here with two different methodological approaches as well. Nobody thinks about kind of French history, German history as a political history, history of the state, right? There was this, in the West, we had this cultural turn and we moved already to different topics. And this is of course the problem of our region, of Ukraine, that it still needs to kind of defend its statehood. And that's why we have very different problems in mind, right? So it would be strange to speak about, say, history of migration, history like, I don't know, economic history, if we don't have, you know, kind of a narrative of well, I don't want to say the narrative because we should go away from these meta-narratives altogether. But I understand why political history is still so present in Ukrainian historiography and it's not in the West. And this is exactly, if we try to see beyond political borders, we employ different topics and we look at different topics. And I think this is what also, where the future of the Ukrainian studies is, in those topics, not in area studies. It shouldn't be the history of Ukraine, but it should be the history of migration, the history of ideas, economic history, and so on and so on. How kind of Ukrainian case studies and expertise, or not experiences, can contribute to bigger topics. So yeah, in a way, it's against borders rather than in their favor.
Very shortly and very quickly. And simply, because we have not many time, and I know that our chairman has 10 questions more. So about borderland and about transfer, about the Ukraine and borderland. In my opinion, over past 400, 500 years, Ukraine wasn't a borderland. In the time of Rzeczpospolita obojga narodów, Polish, Lithuanian Commonwealth, Eastern Ukraine understanding not in the today borders, but in historical borders of those three so-called free Ukrainian voivodeships was a borderland in the time of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It was borderland between Rzeczpospolita Obojga Narodów and Moscow and Turks, Tatars, and after three Rzeczpospolita's partitions, it was again borderland, southwestern, between Moscow and Austria, and again Turks. And now, second part of your question, now, yes, it is territory of transition, of course. As I said before, Ukraine is now standing up to be independent, not in opinion of Ukrainians themselves, but in opinion of whole the world.
Okay, thank you. So if the audience is carefully following our discussion, I think you see that we have different opinions, and that's maybe already good. My next question is also related to Robert Frost's lecture, which was really excellent. Thank you for that. But this one issue, the last question Robert raised, I'm not sure I understood it. It's not that I didn't understand it, but I'm not sure I would agree that there's a problem how to integrate Russia in new historical narratives or whatever you call. I don't think that you can write any history of this region without including Russia in one way or another, at least in the period that I am dealing with. I see that Robert is saying that I'm misinterpreting his question. Okay, but still, since the question was raised, would you react to this question? Maybe you understood it correctly, not like me. So, Irena, please.
Absolutely splendid keynote lecture. I was actually not so surprised, but its reaction was even stronger and really so emotional. But thinking about including Russia's history, thinking about all those Russian studies centers and whatever, that so much we're depending also on what Russian historians also from Soviet Union, historians of Russia, from Belarus, from Ukraine, that are working in various Western centers. But being somehow not badly familiar with Russian historiography, I was thinking, gosh, it's like Jews in Egypt. You have to build a pyramid. Because all historiography, it has to be reviewed against the conceptual structure of that history. And we have to go everywhere. So I'm just observing what my colleagues, Russian historians, some of those that still look into it, how they start thinking about decolonizing themselves, de-imperializing. And where it is, it's just, 1 millimeter, because for them it's changing everything they worked. So that's such a huge task, and if we begin to tackle on it, if somebody specializes in something, of Russian history, then to look into it. But that means questioning everything, rechecking. It's huge work to do, to see Russia, not to be ideological and political, because that you can do very quickly. But if to do that academically, it's a humongous work. And here Russia becomes very interesting as object to study. But that's for new generation, at least from my side.
So I don't see any hands raised to react to this question. So let's move to the next question. And now I will start my question by quoting famous Ukrainian historian Andrii Portnov recently remarked that Ukrainian historians have to prove that he or she is not a nationalist. Guilty until proven otherwise. I think I heard similar remarks from Frank Siessen, and I would say I experienced it myself many times. So, what can we do with that? Andrii.
Okay, I assume that's a quote from a piece that we wrote together with my sister, like in the first days of the full-scale aggression for Slavic Review, and I gave there some examples. I know also that my German colleagues usually don't believe me when I'm giving those examples, but they're real. I'm not like, it's now about, believing in the narratives, whatever. I'm not going to retell you those stories, they're not very pleasant for me. And actually also I would say for those who use this logic, but it is there. What I could tell here to make maybe like our discussion more provocative, because I don't feel well that it goes so like slowly. It's not the topic that should be discussed so slowly. It's really about Zeitenwende or not. Let's not pretend it's just like, oh no, it's very fundamental, also very emotional. And in Germany emotional is bad. If you're emotional, you are immediately disqualified. So, I think it's not so simple as, for instance, our colleague just said, that kind of we professors, we academicians, live in this post-national world. I don't feel like that. That's not my feeling in Germany for 10 years. That's not my feeling about Ukraine, that's not my feeling about Russia. Or about the US, where I'm used to publish a lot of stuff for years. I think we should start deeply asking ourselves unpleasant questions. For instance, like why we constantly, we historians, why we constantly use, especially in Germany, this notion of nationalism when it comes to Ukraine. Why? I could give you a million examples. I'm reviewing the books, I'm listing it out. And why every political program and party in Ukraine in 1917 is nationalist, according to this one. One of the biggest surprises, if you ask what surprised my German students for those years, one of the biggest surprises was when I told them that the Ukrainian Central Rada and the Ukrainian People's Republic and Petlura government, they were socialists. And that they used Yiddish on the money they published. It was a shock. Oh my God, how that could be? And for me, shock was that my colleagues are not reflecting on that. Let me maybe stop at this point.
Yeah, very good point, but who can answer to your question in this panel? Okay. Irena, maybe you would like to reflect on this?
Well, I'm definitely not going to speak for German.
Yeah, okay. So, Anke has no choice but to react as the only German in the panel.
Okay, thanks for inviting me. I think actually, Andrii, I agree with you, and I think that this is really something that we were discussing. Also, some of my colleagues who joined us in that discussion are here tonight. That we were, and also Darius and I talked about this in summer, that maybe there should be also as part of the decolonization process a re-evaluation of the concept of the nation as an emancipative force, and therefore to turn this discussion around altogether. I would agree with you that the discussion about transnationalism that is going on in historiography for quite some time did really nothing to, did really not a lot of good things to kind of deconstruct, for example, Russian imperial or Soviet history. And I was in a discussion with our colleague Kasyanov, and he said, well, Ruski Mir is also a transnational concept. So we should probably at least rethink this, this perspective that transnational is always the good thing, and what we were discussing since we were also rethinking the concept of empire for the last like 20 years, and I think this is going to be also a panel here. Maybe we should also rethink the concept of nation.
I mean, Andrii raised serious questions, and we all agree that changes are needed. So my next question is, so the debates are going for almost 10 years. If we start with 2014 and the first discussions 2015 published by Slavic Review and other journals, now we have a more intense debates for a year and a half. Do you see any changes in the field or not? Olena, maybe I would ask you. I mean, changes in...
I'm the youngest on the panel. I don't think I can really trace the evolution. So
yeah, but I'm asking about the changes in the last year and a half. Do you see any changes in choosing topics, in renaming institutions, in choosing topics for the conferences, for the congresses, etc.?
All right. Perhaps this is just something that comes to mind, and this is for me as a historian of Ukraine, something that was really liberating was the experience of the first conference after the invasion, the 2022 conference, the BASIS conference, the British Association of Slavonic and Eastern European Studies, when Russians were banned. And this is when we speak about these epistemological hierarchies, when Ukrainians or non-Russians were not the last person on the panel, but we were seen and visible. When we were not there to support or contradict, Russian colleagues, but we were there but this is a negative example because Russians were not there. It was liberating in a way that we could speak about different topics. We were not just, the argumentation was led by us, in a way, and not by others that we needed to basically navigate. I think that was a very positive experience, but of course I don't think it's gonna continue this way. Russians will be back, or are back already, to major conferences, and I don't know, to be honest, I don't know whether there will be a change. My personal take is that this decolonization is just a fashionable word, that another year and it's going to be over, that we will go back to as it was, and I don't know whether we can we must use this momentum for a change, but whether it will come, I don't know. And in a way, it's linked to what Andrii was discussing, that if the West still perceives Ukrainians, Lithuanians as nationalists, then they would also just wait for this nationalists to kind of go away and go back to different topics, or the one that is. So I'm not very optimistic, to be honest. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I'd like to ask Anke, do you see any changes so far within this period of time after the full-scale invasion?
Well, I don't want to sound overly optimistic here because there would be probably only a fairy tale, but I think that actually at least in the broader public and also in the field, the necessity to deal with regions that were not in the focus of interest before 2014, and also, of course, even stronger after 2022. This is there, and I have the sincere hope that this will remain there. Also, also a certain interest of students, of the public, to also try to rethink the image of Europe, and of course, this also brought by some institutional changes, for example, in Germany after 2014, there was a choice opened up, like a new institution, obviously. I think this is not, of course, sufficient, but probably, it can be a possibility to catch up with this momentum.
So, but I understand that Andrii is more pessimistic about this. I'm provoking. That's my job today.
Now, again, you see, dear colleagues, it could be viewed on different levels. For instance, let's take a very practical level, yeah? Geographical names, how they are written. I'm closely following that debate. I also remember first reactions to my online publication in German in the first weeks of full-scale aggression, where I said, like, guys, look, why we have, in German media, for instance, why we have the city of Dnipro and the river of Dnieper. Because you have inertia for Dnieper, and Dnipro is a new name. It was Dnipropetrovsk before, so you could easily switch to Dnipro as a city, but the river is, of course, Dnieper. No, clear. What else? It's Dnieper, till now, actually. And then, believe me or not, dear colleagues, again, I've made this article, I've spoken at different conferences, it was like, okay, those nationalists, you know. But then some people like Martin Schulze-Wessel, Gwendolyn Zase started saying, actually, maybe we should start writing Kyiv instead of Kiev, just show minimum respect, even in our post-national world. And now it's getting more and more okay. And again, like, believe me, I'm just finishing now a review of German books published after February 24th. It's a fascinating topic on Ukraine. And you see there are some books that still use Russian, like traditional, so to say, Russian naming. The majority use like a combination of both, because people are not quite sure, and they're bad in Ukrainian. There are no editors in Ukrainian. There are no standards of Ukrainian transliteration. Let's be frank about it, because do we need it in our post-national world? Maybe not anymore. So, and some are consistently Ukrainian transliterated. So there is a change. I could not say there is no change. There's no obvious change. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. In my view, it's not enough. In my view, in Germany, I don't know why we focus on Germany. Maybe it's my mistake. We could also talk about, you know, Poland, or Britain, or France, or whatever else. But I think that for some reasons, maybe we have no time to discuss them, this notion of Zeitenwende, so like epochal change, turning point, right? It came very easily, in Chancellor Scholz's speech on 22nd of February, so 5 days, 3 days after the full-scale aggression. And there were nice declarations, but declarations and even rhetoric is not Zeitenwende itself. That's my point. And we should think much more seriously about institutional level. Absolutely. About like names, of course, because it's nice that everything is called Eastern Europe, like Eastern Europe, but everybody knows what this Eastern Europe actually usually is. I mean, it's Russian and Soviet history, let's be frank about it. And we know about the level of Ukrainian language capacity of people who are now pretending to be Ukrainian specialists. So let's stop pretending, let's be frank, finally, dear colleagues. That's the only thing I want to say. And there is some tendency, but we should not overestimate it, but we also should not say, no, nothing is happening. Of course not, it's a process, of course, like a slow process, as always in the academic field. But this general distrust, and again, this inertia of distrust is very strong. Also, if I may say so, distrust in Ukrainian voices. I think we should discuss this issue, like which role those Ukrainian exile or non-exile scholars play in those debates, whether they are really equal partners in them. For me, it's a very big issue to be discussed. It's not so obvious at all. And then we'll see. But again, university academic system is always conservative, in good sense maybe, so it needs time. It would be better to discuss it maybe in 5 years, looking where this development will take us. But when I'm telling about it, you see, dear colleagues, I should say it here again. Here I should say it again, a person with Ukrainian passport. I should say it again. When I'm saying it about transliterations, about language, about Zeitenwende, I'm not at all calling for going back to national history of the 19th century. On the contrary, I'm proposing to rethink Russian, Polish, Ottoman, Jewish, Ukrainian studies in a new way. I'm not a nationalist.
Okay, Irena, please.
Well, Andrii started from academic point of view, then wandered into outside of strict academic discourse and came back into something of that. I would like to behave badly. Also because Robert Frost yesterday, when in his key lecture, used that image of lemmings, talking about inertia of academia and of fashionable trends and something like that. Because since it just happens so, but I'm on the border between attention to the politics and being an academic historian, that talk about transnational, that we already are transnational. I have to say that reality that we are living in, already with Russia, but also with Europe. Russia is, still Europe, but also it happens just opposite. We have national issue rising again and being rise, and I believe it will continue. Looking from what it will be different nationalism from 19th century, but issue of the national state is definitely on the table in politics, and it's not just Poland, Hungary, and I don't know, not really in Baltic countries. It's moving west in Europe. And we cannot discount it, and just question how long also academics and political scientists are already talking about it, but historians also will have to look into some questions at the beginning of the 20th century, how we came to this, and then maybe going back into reevaluating also 19th century a notion of nationalism. So I would say, let's not relax. Thank you.
Olena, you wanted to react? Or? Okay, now we can move to another topic of this discussion and to discuss the issue of Ukrainian scholars. Now many of them are displaced or in difficult working conditions in Ukraine, and my question is about their future. I mean, we know that many of them also on the other side are in the army. And on the one hand, that's a very bad situation personally for many of them. But on the other hand, now they are at least temporarily integrated into Western academia. And I mean, most of you might know much better than I do about such a phenomenon like Invisible University. I know about them mostly from Ostap Sereda, and what I know from him that there are very many young people who are really interested in getting knowledge, not only in getting diploma or something like that. So how do you see the future of young academicians, Ukrainian academicians? I can also formulate this question a little bit differently. Yesterday there was a panel on the history of Jews in Ukraine, and Yaroslav Hryca, who had to leave earlier, he said that he saw a very positive trends in Jewish studies in Ukraine. But at the moment, many of these young people who studied Jewish studies, now they are in the army, and so he was not sure about sustainability of this very positive trend that was before the war. So maybe we'll address this question to our Ukrainian colleagues who are on the panel, first of all. So maybe Olena. I know, I formulated a kind of 3 questions in one. You can choose whatever aspects you would like.
Well, I think it's a very unfair question because we don't know, how long the war will be, when people will be able to go back, when they will be able to go back to their academic routine, how many of them will stay in the West, and this is why I'm pessimistic because I don't think that positions will appear for those people. How many will need to change their careers and so on and so on. I think it's an unfair question. I just don't know whether we can speculate what will happen in a month's time, in a half a year, if we don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know, Andrii, maybe you have something to say, but this is the same example as you said with the Jewish studies. I know we had also a workshop on Muslims in Ukraine and on Crimean Tatars, and there is this scholar who defended his PhD in Canada, who was back in Ukraine, who was working on his monograph on kind of Russian colonization of Crimea, and he's now in the army. So what will happen, to him? What will happen to his research? What will happen to his books? So I don't know whether we can speculate with this at this moment. I don't know, Andrii, you might have a different point. I'm sorry, yeah.
Okay.
I think, again, maybe I'm wrong here. I think Darius said something very important. I mean this even temporary, but still integration into, okay, in some case German, in other case Polish, but also, of course, Irish, British, right, US, Canadian, Australian academic milieu. Because dear colleagues, like accidentally, I'm doing a research on Ukrainian, let's say, academic immigrations in 20th century. So if you compare the current situation to what was happening in the 1920s, right? So after the revolutions and, for instance, when the entire Petlura army came to Poland, right? Or after the Second World War, when again, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, also scholars, appeared at first in West Germany, and then in the US and Canada, right? So, if you look back at the 40s especially, we'll see that those Ukrainian academic projects, institutions, they were mostly designed as Ukrainian immigrant institutions in Germany or in Canada, not really integrated into the German or Canadian academic system. Only later on came people like Omelian Pritsak, who said, no, guys, we should stop that. We should actually integrate ourselves into Harvard in order to have a kind of voice, or in Canada, in the existing Edmonton University and so on. And now it's different, because now many people are like kind of automatically part, even if temporarily, of almost all bigger universities and institutions. That is why I'm curious, I'm very curious how it will, influence the situation, because my point, again, a discussive point, of course, is that there is a difference, maybe even a widening gap, his question mark, between, let's say, Ukrainian language writing on Ukraine in Ukraine, and Ukrainian studies in different languages outside Ukraine. It's not the same, okay? And theoretically, one could expect that this enormous amount of people with direct knowledge and context and whatever in other countries, that they will, maybe bridge this difference. Maybe on the contrary, maybe provoke its widening. But what I really see as a problem, let's say, not on methodological or whatever level, but on like a practical level, is that, and I know that also from talks here, like at this Congress with the colleagues, that a lot of our friends who came to, again, Germany, Poland, Lithuania, name it, they of course very much, they feel like deeply like insecure about, let's say, next year, next 2 years. As Olena rightly said, nobody knows when the war is over, but this sense of feeling of insecurity is, of course, as we all know, it's not an ideal feeling for systematic, productive academic work. So I would kind of dare to ask our colleagues, for instance, from German foundations, but also on the European level, to think how to make possible, for some time at least, for those people who could not go back, to support them. And at the same time, to keep in mind that we have a lot of colleagues in Ukraine, also very good friends of mine, who are, as you rightly said, sometimes at the army, sometimes just at home, without right to cross the border. That mean, and also having almost no payment or very little payment. It means that I would say that German foundations, again German government maybe, should give more attention and more money for different types of fellowships, whatever, contracts for the people who could not leave Ukraine, but who would like to integrate themselves into some projects together with the German and other colleagues outside Ukraine. That's a big challenge for, let's say, strategic planning of the academic communication in the next decades.
Yeah, I think we are maybe putting too much stress on Germany. I mean, Germany is just one European country. There are also other subjects that might be discussed. And another thing that I have to say that, of course, it was my mistake to put different situations into one question. I mean, there was a situation with the people in the army, but first of all, I had in mind that situations that were discussed now in detail by Andrii. But we also have Jan in this audience, who maybe is the right person also to tell us about his experience, and as far as I know, many Ukrainians at your center at the most.
Thank you. About Ukraine academic life, the situation is Ukraine is very well known. Not good possibilities to travel across Ukraine, to be in over parties, over universities. I would like to emphasize this moment only two centers. Karazin University in Kharkiv and Miecznikow University in Odessa. In both, there were good historical centers. Now they have no possibilities to operate. The first point. The second one is that because of war, several hundreds of Ukrainian historians and humanitarians are abroad, or temporary war refugees, or, in my opinion, perhaps in emigration. The future show it. I know it very well because in Studium Europy Wschodniej, University of Warsaw, I have a group of Ukrainian Ukrainian humanitarians who were refugees after February 24, and I have created a special unit for them. In Polish Studium Badań nad Ukrainą, in English it would be a center to study on Ukraine, not Ukrainian studies, but on Ukraine. And the majority of this group, they are historians. And in Poland we have also other EU countries who have historians, war refugees from PhD students and young candidates using Ukrainian language, young candidates to distinguished professors. I have in the center in Warsaw, in our studio, I have two well-known historical Ukrainian historians. And we have a strange situation. Our colleagues, Ukrainian historians, have very difficult situation with research and didactical work in Ukraine, the first point. And from the second side, we have several hundred Ukrainian historians in the West. So, and we have quite interesting situation. Never ever before Ukrainians have had so many of their historians in the Western universities. It is a great chance, but it is the result of tragedy of war, chance and tragedy. So you must agree that this is a surprising dichotomy.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I would react to what Andrii said. I'm not sure I would agree that at the moment Ukrainian historians, especially in the North America, they are not equal partners in all these discussions for the last year and a half. Earlier, I would agree, but at the moment it seems that they really are equal partners. At least that's my impression. Sure.
This is actually about integration and equal partners. This is an anecdote. An anecdote what happened to us in Basel. We had a famous professor from Princeton with a Russian background, or from Russian origin professor from Princeton as a guest in Basel. And when this professor was challenged with writing Kievan Rus as part of the Russian history and narrative, the answer was, I don't know about these Ukrainian claims. If you want to know about that, read this Ukrainian professor from Harvard. What is his name? And this was incredible. If they don't even remember names of the professor in Harvard and just discard like this is for Ukrainians to read because this is the Ukrainian professor in Harvard. And that was painful, but this is exactly about integration and being equal partner. And yeah.
Okay. What's the role of historians in informing the public about Russia's current aggression? And can we do something better in this field? Maybe Irena? Okay, and then Irena, please.
Thank you. But one word only. It is not a role for historians. It is a role for media. We have our duties.
Yes, of course, but I think that Serhiy Splohy's book did a very good job as well. Yeah, Irena, please.
Yes, it depends, how historians understand their duties, and there is, this strict academic approach, but there are areas. First of all, I say, if there's responsibility for war, somebody has that burden. Historians are indirectly, even Russian historians, even though there were ones that worked directly in Russian Strategic Center and were paving way for 2014, but those are personal responsibilities, and usually as historians they were very poor. But we are being asked by media, we have to be ready to talk about it, and not to be overly academic. That's a question also historians being able to communicate, not to be too much emotional. It's very hard sometimes, but also to expand knowledge. Media is not knowledgeable. Usually, there's somebody who specializes in something. So if media asks historians, I think we have to stand up to that and try to give what we can contribute. We cannot talk about how the war will end. Nobody knows. We hope, but otherwise, so there is co-responsibility. But I would blame for a lot of things political scientists. And now actually following how things are, but those are political scientists that serve different political powers and political groups. They are at information war. There is information war regarding Ukraine and regarding the war. And also scholars are being drawn or actually volunteer for it. So it's mixed. There is responsibility, but it's usually personal, depending on, subservient, serving something. So I see so.
Okay, Olena, please.
I would agree that indeed we as historians, we do need to talk to the general audience, to the general public, just because history is one of the weapons of this war. And we as historians, professional historians, unfortunately we need to debunk the kind of the perspective on history of the biggest historian of them all, the president of Russia, who uses history to justify the war. This is the problem, that history is being politicized, history is being manipulated and is used as a means to justify the aggression. And if it's a means to legitimize the war, so perhaps asking questions and answering this question is a kind of small way to delegitimize the war. So I think I agree totally. Historians, professional historians, they need to engage in this conversation. We need to talk to people, even if it's sometimes very kind of tiring to repeat the same thing in a very simple way over and over again. But this is, in a way, I think it's our duty at this time. But I also wanted to address the question of personal and institutional, or perhaps like kind of not institutional, but collective responsibility of historians. And Andrii, I want to thank you for organizing the debate that you did with Marina Mogilna as part of the Prisma Ukraina. And Marina, for me, it was it was really striking how she, in a way, accepted responsibility for normalizing the Russian Empire and the Russian history more generally. And there are those, and we will talk tomorrow about the imperial turn and the consequences of this intellectual paradigm for normalizing the empire, for looking what good it did, for, managing diversity. Same with the Soviet Union, for kind of the modernizing the component of the Soviet Union, right, and so on and so on and so on. But it made the West, and on those consumers of those history books, in a way blind to the fact that empires are always violence. They are a result of violence. And it just created this idea of not wanting to see. And this is why 24th February came as a surprise. From 2014 to 2022, people it was uncomfortable at the beginning, but then they forgot again. And then it came as a surprise. Why? Because nobody wanted to see what was happening. And it didn't happen overnight. It was a continuous process of mobilization, of politicization, of kind of nationalization of Russia, right? Of militarization, this is what I was looking for. And nobody wanted to acknowledge. It's not that nobody saw it, they did. They just didn't want to acknowledge it because it breaks everything they've been working on.
Yeah, thank you. I like this take very much. Maybe a footnote is needed here. Marina Mogilna is professor at the University of Illinois in Chicago and one of the editors of Imperial Journal. My personal impression, I might be wrong, but my personal impression is that when speaking about collective responsibility, you will get it in Europe, in Germany. I'm not sure about the US. but that's very subjective impression that I have. Andrii.
Too much of me, I'm not happy about it at all. Okay, I could say that, of course I agree about this necessity to talking to media. I did it myself, especially in the first weeks and months, and later on I realized actually what role I played usually in those talks. And then there were some scandals. I'm sure that some of you, dear colleagues, remember them. For instance, what happened to Jaroslav Hrycak mentioned about when he tried to give an interview to a leading French, let's talk about France, to a leading French newspaper about Bandera, and believe me or not, the same guy called me the same day when he called Jaroslav, but me, with my experience, talking to media about Bandera, say I have no time to talk to you. And I was right. And poor Jaroslav tried to explain something and then... So, what I'm trying to say here, unfortunately, it's not so easy that if we, professional historians, I'm asking myself, would I ever define myself that way? Okay, so if we, professional historians, would go to the media and give our rational knowledge about problematic issues, then the world would become better. It would be great to be so. I would be really happy to live in such a world, but I'm afraid the world we live in is not this one. And the second point linked to it, like debunking Putin. You know, when Putin published one of those articles about this so-called unity of Ukrainians and Russians, right, on the Kremlin website, I refused to many media to comment about it at all. I'm not saying it was right or wrong, I'm just giving you an example. A lot of people commented, as we all know. If we talk any book nowadays published, it of course analyzes this article, but what we have at the end, dear colleagues, let us look broadly in this phenomenon. As Olena rightly said, if we ask ourselves whom do we read and criticize the most, the obvious answer is Putin. As one of my Romanian friends said once, you know, Andrii, who is the biggest Ukrainian studies specialist nowadays? I was like, Snyder maybe, or Plochy. He said, of course Putin. Who quotes and whom are we quoting and criticizing all the time? Now, what I'm trying to say here, negative quoting is also quoting. Quite often it is Putin and not Snyder, and not Plochy and not Hrycak, or Natalia Yakovenko, who formulates the questions, who formates the field we are talking about. For instance, who start discussion, who have historical rights for Crimea? And historians say, okay, let's think about it. Who have those historical rights? Maybe Crimean Tatars, maybe Ottoman Empire, maybe the Gothic people who were there. If we start talking like that, Putin wins. Think about it.
Okay, Irena?
I just will try to mention something, totally different thing about history and how history is perceived. And, from the side that may be the most unexpected from Russia. One very influential departments of history, Moscow State University, after Putin historian, and especially after the school book that was discussed quite widely also outside of Russia on history was prepared, enrollment of this year dropped by 15%. Interpret as you want. In Russia, this year, enrollment into history department dropped by 15%.
Anke, you took mic, that means you're going to react.
Yes, I just wanted to, I wanted to add to what Andrii said, that there was a very shortly after the full invasion of Ukraine, there was a colleague of ours, Martina Winkler, who said, we as historians shouldn't react to what happened because it's not a historical problem. So just let's not react to it, and let's not get involved into this discussion. Is this historically right or wrong? And I think there's a lot to it. On the other hand, there is, of course, not sufficient knowledge about Eastern Europe, about Ukraine, and maybe this is why so many historians really react to questions from the media. But in Germany, we really have the problem that we have also other people who claim that they know about Eastern Europe, and they are very strong in the discourse. And so this is actually, we don't have to do all the sophisticated things about new imperial history or something, but we just have to say the basics, and in order to not lead the discourse to the pro-Kremlin narratives.
Okay, we are running out of time, and still there were a couple of questions we were going to discuss, like whether the war helps to discuss difficult problems in the past, and whether there is a sense to organize such congresses at all. But I know if I ask one of these questions, we might have one more heated debate, and then we'll go over time. But I will let you to have a final word if you think that I missed an important question, or you still have something for the very end of this discussion. So the floor is yours if you have something to say. So Jan and
a war won't help. A war won't help. It means strange, but really it is a chance for historians. I will emphasize again Ukrainian problem, the main topic here in our debate. I said before about those several hundred Ukrainian historians abroad, and especially in Western European, Western, and American, Canadian universities. It is strange, but it is a chance. And because of war, perhaps the first time after World War II, where the West started to looking at Ukraine. It's the first. Secondly, the West started to listen Ukrainian, Polish, Lithuanian, Central European specialists. Listen, of course, does not means listen to and accept, not, but it is absolutely colossal change. And it is a chance for Ukrainian, again about Ukraine, it is a chance for Ukrainian historians, Ukrainian specialists to show, not to inform about war. I would like to emphasize again, it is the role of media, but to show in Western academic circles that Ukraine has his own history, that Ukraine has his own Ukrainian art, that Ukraine had his own Ukrainian literature. All. I can add and emphasize that only 10, 12 years before, American university books about Western civilization show the eastern border of Western civilization in the eastern as the eastern border of Federal Republic of Germany. It was the eastern border of Western civilization. And after many years of hard work of Professor Sulima Kamiński, we had some photos and some informations in the American books about Poland, about Lithuania, and I hope also about Western Ukraine. It is the great success.
Olena, please. Short comment and
yes,
then...
I will be very brief, and it actually ties together with this chance that we have, because I think that the real chance that we have is not only to tell the history of Ukraine, but also kind of push the revisiting of the history of the empire, Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and so on and so on. Why? And I think you had one of these questions, whether Ukrainians will lead the change. Because we have this spotlight, we need to help shift the lens. That it's not a kind of challenge the positionality that we have until now. That it's not only Russian historians who can speak on the center and the peripheries, but that historians of the peripheries can speak about the center. And I think this is a real chance, because we have a spotlight. We should challenge the kind of the hierarchy, and if we try, or if we manage to reverse the lens, then it will help all, these kind of so-called peripheral people to contribute with the knowledge and enrich the knowledge about the center. And this is when the change will happen.
Yeah, I'm trying to do my best in what you said. I'm trying to change that. Okay, Andrii, the last sentence.
I want to thank the organizers. I think such congress definitely makes sense. Definitely. And I would also like to thank Darius, who invested, believe me, dear colleagues, who invested a lot of time and energy in preparing and thinking this debate. So it's probably the best moderator I've ever had in my own life. Thank you very much.
You never ever will get a last word at such panels. Thank you very much. Our time is over. I think we had an interesting debate, and thank you.